If I say that absolutely cursed Chobani ad, you all know what I mean, right? The ridiculously well-crafted video that's basically synonymous with the concept of solar punk. I mean, it's right here on the featured image on the aesthetics wiki. And also it's a commercial for a yogurt company whose whole product is based on single-use plastic. The thing where some people say that, quote, the punk in this solar punk comes from cutting the corporation out of the picture, and some people say that, this piece of art retains its integrity and its message regardless of the product placement. Great. Let's put a pin in that and talk about Citizen Sleeper, a 2022 role-playing game by Jump Over the Age. In Citizen Sleeper, you play as a consciousness uploaded to an artificial body. You've escaped the corporation that made you, SNARP, and you're on this space station called the Eye. At the beginning of the game, surviving is incredibly hard. You can barely pay for food, let alone the stabilizer that stops your body from destroying itself in an act of planned obsolescence. That stuff costs 100 shits a pop, and if you're lucky, a full day's work might net you 12. But eventually, you'll find your feet, and you'll be able to pay for passage over to the Greenway. And in the Greenway, there are mushrooms. Citizen Sleeper is really, really good, but it's hard to overstate how much getting a mushroom farm up and running trivializes the back third of the game. Not only can you sell them at 3 for 80 chits, but with a bit of tinkering and the help of a local scientist, you can also use them to manufacture your own stabilizer, massively decreasing the amount of money you actually need. You can also use them to help people across the Eye, from the chef at the local ramen joint to a bunch of trapped refugees who need supplies. Mushrooms can do it all. And specifically, these mushrooms are doing exactly what you need them to do. Without getting too much into it, because honestly the convenience is the thing to focus on here, they make stabilizers specifically for you on purpose. Nature has seen how hard you've been working and it's come to give you a hand. This is something I'm seeing more and more of when it comes to how fungi are portrayed in the media. They're warriors who have the solution to climate change. They're going to feed us all while also eating all the waste we're producing. In The Mushroom at the End of the World, Anna Lowenhaupt Singh traces the Matsutake industry, which exists on the edges of capitalism. She focuses on the metaphor of salvage because Matsutake grow best in human-disturbed forests, and their farming can't be scaled into a massive industry. The subtitle of the book is On the Possibility of Life in Capitalist Ruins, because, like these mushrooms, maybe we can flourish among destruction, finding new ways to be outside of the infinite, all-consuming growth impulse of the shareholder economy. If we open ourselves to their fungal attractions, Matsutake can catapult us into the curiosity that seems to me the first requirement of collaborative survival in precarious times, writes Singh. And it dovetails exactly with the use of mushrooms in Citizen Sleeper, many of which actually are Matsutake. The mushrooms grow in an area where a commune promotes collaborative living, a scientist is driven by pure curiosity, and people survive despite the decaying space station around them. And isn't that a nice story for our times? Growth from decay? Isn't that something we could wrap up in a little bow and call a video essay? But I keep coming back to how easy the end of Citizen Sleeper is. It feels out of place with the scrounging, desperate opening. It's somehow all too neat. Look a little closer, and fungi resist neat stories. The opening of Merlin Sheldrake's Entangled Life focuses on the particular open mind he found himself developing while researching. I have tried to find ways to enjoy the ambiguities that fungi present, but it's not always easy to be comfortable in the space created by open questions, he says. Agoraphobia can set in. It's tempting to hide in small rooms built from quick answers. I've done my best to hold back. So, let's think about ambiguity. Singh mentions that Matsutake became a status symbol to elite Japanese buyers, and so some would plant their own pre-cut mushrooms to make sure they had the aesthetic in place for visitors, even when the reality was that there was nothing growing. Is anybody else suddenly thinking about yogurt? Later in Entangled Life, Sheldrake talks about the fact that tree roots and mycelium have a symbiotic relationship, with fungi sharing the rewards of decomposition with trees, and trees sharing the rewards of photosynthesis with the fungi. This idea was first proposed by biologist Albert Frank in 1885 and was dismissed as what Sheldrake calls sentimental illusion. At the time, it was believed that symbiosis was impossible, and all relations in nature were either competitive or parasitic. But then we began to lean in the opposite direction. We've discovered resources moving between trees, and we frame it as them sending food to their neighbours, even neighbours of different species, using the mycorrhizal network. At first glance, it looks like altruism, says Sheldrake, which is a puzzle because trees would be helping their competitors, potentially damaging themselves in the process. There are multiple arguments for why this might still happen, but Sheldrake proposes a simple reframe. It's not the trees that are doing this, it's the fungi. It's of benefit to them to keep the forest alive and diverse so that all of their eggs aren't in one basket. And from here, the web of interactions that fungi make and facilitate becomes more complicated. Sheldrake suggests putting them on a spectrum, quote, with parasites at one pole and cooperative mutualists on the other. And these are not necessarily different species, but simply different situations. Grow cooperative fungi alongside other cooperative fungi and they might become less cooperative, he writes. Same fungus, same plant, different setting, different outcome. Remember the Chobani ad? Well, hold on to it a little longer, because it's time to talk about Palestine. At the beginning of April, the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement made Microsoft one of its primary targets. In particular, it targets the gaming department, Xbox Game Pass, consoles and accessories, and games published by Microsoft-owned studios like Activision and Bethesda. This has left many games critics like me feeling out their roles and responsibilities. Unlike the SAG-AFTRA strike, where, and I use this phrase deliberately, content creators were asked not to cover struck work, BDS hasn't raised any similar guidelines. To, say, review a Microsoft game would technically not break the boycott since I get codes directly from the publisher and don't hand over any money in return. That's how I played Avowed a couple of months before the boycott was called. Now, to be clear, I didn't like it, and I wouldn't encourage playing it even if you hadn't been specifically asked not to by people currently undergoing genocide. But it is factually true that Avowed has a lot to say about mushrooms in a world of grinding colonialist machines. It's no Citizen Sleeper, but you could spin up a similarly neat narrative from it. If I was writing a straightforward, easy essay, I could put them in conversation with each other and talk about growth from decay and be done with it. Or, I could look a bit deeper. I wouldn't review Avowed today, and I know there are plenty of other games critics out there who have said they won't be covering Microsoft-published games for as long as they remain on the BDS priority list, but they remain a huge part of the context of the industry, and so there are a lot more difficult questions about how they get covered and contextualized as part of our work. The most important article in all of this remains Autumn Wright's piece, Games Media Can't Ignore BDS Xbox Boycott, in which he writes, "The call to action has arrived to each and every member of the games media, and we must now choose how to respond, and know that when we write about Elder Scrolls 6 or Call of Duty from now on, we are choosing." But Wright emphasizes that solidarity and liberation do not come through adhering to a checklist of quote-unquote good behaviors. Instead, we must reckon with the context of our decisions. And in considering Citizen Sleeper, Avowed, and the stories we tell about mushrooms, I would add that we must resist the easy, neat narratives. One of the main criticisms I've seen of the Microsoft boycott is that it's very difficult to extract the brand from our lives entirely. I'm writing this on a Windows PC. I'm not immune to feeding money to the corporation that gives Israel AI tools to use in its bombing campaigns. But firstly, this is why BDS are focused on the gaming division, an area where they correctly argue that viable alternatives exist. And secondly, as Wright notes in her piece, these contradictions should not become excuses. They should be fuel for making a different world, one where we don't have to wrestle with them anymore. We could wait for the mushrooms to come and save us, like they do in Citizen Sleeper. Wouldn't it be convenient? We can live in hope that fungi will solve climate change, food insecurity, and waste management. Doesn't it seem like a nice story? Life from decay? Or, as Sheldrake implores us, we can keep ourselves open to ambiguity. We can look beyond these narratives to the more complicated truth behind them. Avowed may have a story to tell about mushrooms, but its context now disrupts that story. Avoiding reviewing Microsoft games isn't a choice that I should feel somehow absolves me from taking other actions towards the world that I want to see. It's one part of a much larger, more complicated picture. I'm honestly surprised that quote-unquote mushroompunk isn't a thing yet. It feels like the next logical step from solarpunk, an aesthetic that has itself been stripped of any radical ambition. Its poster child is, after all, a Chobani ad. It's a vision of hope, and it's made by a fucking yogurt company whose CEO has a net worth of $2.5 billion. And they have a class action lawsuit against them, literally for allegedly greenwashing, by the way. And still, I can feel mushroompunk coming. We're not in the 2010s optimism anymore, and we will want to find things growing from the destruction we've created. And we love an easy story. Even more so, we love an aesthetic, something that doesn't even require the nuances of a narrative at all, just an easy on the eye spark of hope to tide us over. But we owe it to the complexity of fungi to be open to ambiguities. Find out if that matsutake is growing despite its circumstances or because it was planted there to look good. Make that context the story. As Wright says at the end of her piece, quote, "Our writing must do the work to shape how others understand the world, and we can't do that by resisting nuance." Same fungus, same plant, different setting, different outcome.